And Albury on the New South Wales-Victoria border are again under lockdown after cases emerged. Reporter Amy Greenbank has more.
It's a blow for residents who were relishing their new freedoms after the stay-at-home orders were lifted less than a week ago. This new lockdown will last 7 days. Typically, it would be twice that, but health authorities say they're confident they can curb the outbreak in that time.
Health has made a decision that the period of lockdown initially will be 7 days. Now, the reason for that is to try and get a handle on what exactly is going on in the local areas. In the normal course, more often than not, health determines that it would be 14 days, but in this case, looking at the issues, health has determined that 7 days will be appropriate, but I'm just warning the community that it may be longer.
And there's better news for a dozen other regional locations, Amy.
Yeah, there certainly is. 12 regional locations will see their lockdown lift. This includes in parts of New England, the Upper Hunter, the Bega Valley and Snowy Monaro. But with school holidays just around the corner, the Deputy Premier John Barilaro is warning residents not to get too carried away.
The reality here is it's not these school holidays you should be travelling. Again, I encourage people to stay home, only travel if they need to, and avoid areas that there are cases, avoid areas that are under lockdown conditions. More importantly, I believe this is a time when you've got freedoms in some parts of regional New South Wales. Stay home and spend that time with family because it is a freedom that you have.
Amy, take us through the latest case numbers today.
Well, we've had 1,351 new COVID cases in New South Wales today and a further 12 deaths. That takes the death toll since the start of the Delta outbreak to over 200. Most of today's cases were once again in Sydney's west and southwest. And residents there have had a small win overnight. The 9 p.m. to 5 a.m. curfew was lifted last night after New South Wales saw 80% of its adult population receive their first dose of the vaccination.
There'll be a modest easing of restrictions for Victorians in lockdown as the state reaches a key vaccination milestone. The new rules will come into effect late tomorrow night when 70% of the eligible population will be partially vaccinated. Reporter Annie Kearney has the latest from Melbourne.
Good afternoon, Karina. Yes, some small easing of restrictions coming from midnight tomorrow, as you said. There has been some criticisms, both that the restrictions are going too fast and also that there are still too many restrictions in place, a bit of a bet both ways, if you will. The Premier, Daniel Andrews, made the announcement today because Victoria is supposed to hit that 70% first dose mark at some point today. The easing of restrictions is quite small, but it is basically what Victorians had been promised for the past few weeks. Exercise limits and outdoor gatherings will lift from 2 hours to 4 hours. The 5 kilometre limit will also lift to 10. There is a big, though, carrot for those that are fully vaccinated. Those that are fully vaccinated can gather in groups of 5 adults from 2 households, either in like a picnic style or a walk, while those that aren't vaccinated can now meet with 1 other person. Here's what the Premier had to say about this small easing of restrictions.
This is what Victorians have craved for a long time, and we're pleased to be able to take these modest but I think significant steps to provide this outdoor social interaction. It needs to be done safely, it needs to be done carefully, but these are important steps for us to take today.
On Sunday, the Premier will announce what the roadmap out of restrictions looks like over the next few months. The AMA said this morning that they don't want to see restrictions easing until 80% of Victorians aged 12 and over are fully vaccinated, or at least until a fortnight after that when they are immune.
The problem is the 20% of the community represents about 1.6 million people in Victoria. I don't know where they are, I don't know who they are, and I don't know how they're going to potentially transmit in a COVID-19 infection to an innocent other person.
Annie, talk us through today's case numbers.
541 new cases in Victoria, which is obviously not what we wanted to hear today. And of those, just a portion are linked. There is still a lot of seeding across the northern and the western suburbs. 2/3 of today's cases are from the northern suburbs, about a quarter from the west. But there is also a growing cluster in the southeast, in Dandenong, Clyde and in Keysborough, and that has authorities really concerned. We also saw 10 new cases across regional Victoria. Of those, 7 are connected and authorities say they're under control. The other 3 are in Ballarat. Now, Ballarat was plunged back into a week-long lockdown yesterday because of wastewater detections in the area. So this really highlights that authorities had a problem there, and those 3 cases have now been found. One of those cases is a mystery case not linked to any other clusters. So authorities are really concerned about a growing number of exposure sites across the area. There are at least a dozen, and we are expecting more to be listed later today.
Annie, there are new rules for the construction sector too.
There are, and this also comes down to the regional and metropolitan Melbourne issue we have at the moment with seeding in regional areas. From today, construction workers won't be able to travel from metropolitan Melbourne to regional Victoria or from regional Victoria to metropolitan Melbourne. So that is a big shift from what we've had, and that is because a number of exposure sites at construction areas like in Lorne, in Geelong, different areas across the state. The other big change is mandatory vaccination. So from next Thursday, from the 23rd, construction workers will need to have had at least 1 dose of the vaccine to be able to work on construction sites, and that is a big shift from what we have been seeing. But the Premier says it's really needed to get this growing issue under control and to make sure that the construction sector can continue to operate.
Let's check the progress of the vaccine rollout. More than 305,000 doses have been administered in the past day. The nation is on the brink of reaching the 70% first dose target and will likely hit that milestone tomorrow. Close to 45% of the population aged 16 and over are fully vaccinated. Taking a closer look at the states and territories, New South Wales remains ahead in first doses at 80.7%, but the pace has slowed. Queensland and Western Australia remain behind. Around 58% have received a first jab and 40% are fully vaccinated. The ACT and Victoria are now vaccinating at the fastest pace. Victoria is set to have 70% of its population over 16 vaccinated with 1 dose by tomorrow, triggering a slight easing of restrictions on the weekend, while the ACT is estimated to be 3 days away from joining New South Wales in reaching that 80% first dose target. So the ACT has recorded 15 new infections today. 5 had been in quarantine for their entire infectious period. At least 8 spent part of the time in the community and 11 are linked to known cases. There are 9 COVID patients in hospital. 1 is in intensive care and on ventilation. The Chief Minister, Andrew Barr, says restrictions have prevented the numbers being higher.
The fact that we didn't go through a sort of a pattern of 1 case, 4 cases, 16 cases, 32 cases, 64, 128 and onwards is because the public health measures kicked in and have suppressed the spread, and we've seen our effective reproduction rate hover either slightly below or just above 1, which is why we're seeing this, I guess, stubborn number, often in the low teens.
The man accused of raping former Liberal staffer Brittany Higgins has entered a plea of not guilty in the ACT Magistrates Court. 26-year-old Bruce Lehrman did not appear in court, leaving it to his lawyer to indicate he'll fight the allegations. Elizabeth Byrne reports.
It was a virtual affair, with lawyers for Mr Lehrman and the ACT's Director of Public Prosecutions, Shane Drumgold, appearing in court by video link because of COVID restrictions. Mr Lehrman's lawyer entered a plea of not guilty to a single charge of rape. The court heard Mr Lehrman is in Queensland. It's alleged Mr Lehrman sexually assaulted Ms Higgins in an office at Parliament House on March the 23rd, 2019. A complaint was made to police in February and Mr Lehrman was charged after a long investigation. Today, Mr Drumgold told the court the brief of evidence is ready for the case to be committed for trial in the Supreme Court. But Mr Lehrman's lawyers asked for 4 weeks to prepare. Magistrate Beth Campbell has ordered the case to return to court on October the 14th to be committed for trial. She's also ordered Mr Lemon to appear then, even if only virtually.
2 men have been extradited from Dubai to Sydney accused of being the ringleaders of a transnational drug syndicate supplying MDMA and ice in New South Wales. The arrests mark the end of an 8-year police operation. Detectives allege the men helped import almost 3 tonnes of drugs worth an estimated $150 million. Jamie McKinnell reports.
This investigation began back in December 2013 when police started looking into large-scale drug supply across New South Wales. They say it was mostly ice and MDMA which was being supplied by a transnational crime syndicate. Police have told us today that they were following a trail of alleged money laundering and drug supply, and over the last 8 years they've arrested 28 people. Police have told us that the transnational syndicate has links to the Lone Wolf Motorcycle Club. Now, these 2 men in particular who have been extradited from Dubai to Sydney were arrested over a year ago. They arrived at Sydney International Airport last night and they were escorted into custody by the riot squad. Police have described their lifestyles as being opulent before they went into custody. They've been speaking to us today and they've described the alleged roles these 2 men played as the ringleaders.
These guys are at the top of the food chain. They were involved in the syndicate components controlling the imports from Africa and Europe. They are key players. Obviously, they had significant wealth. We won't rule out the seizure and continued work by government, the New South Wales Crime Commission, the AFP to seize any wealth that derived from their activity.
These 2 men have now been charged with a string of drug-related offences and they're due to face Sydney's Central Local Court today. The allegations against them are that they helped import almost 3 tonnes of drugs into Australia, worth an estimated street value of $150 million. Police have also told us that about 100 officers from State Crime Command were involved in this operation, including 5 detectives who travelled to Dubai to help with this extradition. Those officers are now completing 14 days of quarantine.
American Olympic star Simone Biles has accused the FBI of failing to properly investigate sexual abuse by gymnastics team doctor Larry Nassar. The Olympian and 3 others have testified before a US Senate committee over the handling of their complaints against Nassar, who preyed on young female athletes for years without being apprehended.
I don't want another young gymnast, Olympic athlete, or any individual to experience the horror that I and hundreds of others have endured. To be clear, I blame Larry Nassar, and I also blame an entire system that enabled and perpetrated his abuse.
Took the FBI more than a year to arrest Nassar after allegations were first brought to them in 2015, during which time it's estimated he abused at least 70 more athletes. The FBI director has offered the gymnasts a public apology. The United States has condemned North Korea's latest ballistic missile launch as a violation of multiple United Nations Security Council resolutions. Just hours later, South Korea test-fired its own submarine-launched ballistic missile. Supervised by President Moon Jae-in, the test makes South Korea the first country without nuclear weapons to develop such a system. A senior member of the North Korean leadership warned of a complete destruction of bilateral relations. Here are the top stories on ABC News. China is warning the AUKUS deal to develop nuclear submarines undermines regional stability and could create problems for Australia's relationship with Beijing. The partnership also spells the end of Australia's $90 billion submarine deal with France. The AUKUS alliance will share nuclear and cyber technology and is designed to counter threats in the Indo-Pacific region. A bill to legalise voluntary assisted dying in Queensland has been passed by state parliament after more than 2 days of debate. 61 MPs supported the legislation while 30 voted against the bill. Under the laws, terminally ill adults who meet the eligibility criteria can seek medical help to end their life. Tasmania, South Australia, Victoria and Western Australia have similar legislation. New cases in the New South Wales regional areas of Lismore and Albury will see them go back into lockdown. Large parts of the rest of the state will exit lockdown. 12 deaths have been recorded and more than 1,300 infections. In Victoria, groups of 5 vaccinated people will be allowed to gather outside from Saturday as the state approaches its first vaccination target. 70% of residents are expected to have received their first dose of a vaccine in the next day or two. There are 514 new cases in Victoria. Within a decade or so, the Royal Australian Navy's nuclear-powered submarine fleet will be a structural part of America's Indo-Pacific pivot. The Prime Minister Scott Morrison says the new alliance formed with the UK and US is the most significant security development for Australia since the ANZUS Treaty. He acknowledges the decision is disappointing for France.
Contractual gates were built into the attack class project necessarily. Those gates were there for a reason. Decisions have to be made before you proceed through those gates. And so, as we were looking towards that next gate, we have decided not to enter through it as part of the attack class program, but instead now to pursue this path, which gives us a far greater capability to meet the strategic needs. Stress again, this is about propulsion. This is not about acquiring nuclear weapons. Australia has no interest in that, no plans for it, no policy for it, no contemplation of it. It's not on our agenda. And we will continue to meet all of our obligations under the Treaty on the Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons, as our partners in this exercise will also do. As I've noted, we will not be continuing with the attack class submarine program and have advised the Naval Group and, of course, the Government of France and President Macron of that decision. I want to stress that France remains an incredibly important partner in the Pacific. There is few, if any, other country around the world which understands the importance of the Pacific and has been as committed to the Pacific as France. These are matters that President Macron and I have discussed on many occasions. We share a deep passion for our Pacific family and a deep commitment to them. And I look forward and I hope to see us continue once we move past what is obviously a very difficult and disappointing decision for France. I understand that, I respect it. But as a Prime Minister, I must make decisions that are Australia's national security interests. I know that France would do the same, and I know ultimately that will be understood, and we'll be able to continue to work together for our many shared goals and aims, because fundamentally we share the same values, we share the same vision.
The French government has responded saying it regrets Australia's decision to partner with the US and the UK to build a fleet of nuclear-powered submarines. Director of the International Security Program at the Lowy Institute, Sam Roggeveen, argues there are risks which haven't been properly scrutinised by Parliament.
I'm sure they are calculating that China will be furious, and we know already from a statement issued by the French government that the French are definitely furious with the Americans as much as they are with us. But the bet that the government is making is that over the long term, this will rebound to Australia's advantage. So the life of this program is, 30, possibly 40, maybe even longer years. And what the government is essentially betting on is that Australian and American, and to a degree British interests, will over that period basically remain aligned when it comes to the question of China. Now, I think that's a significant risk in the project. We are essentially giving up on this idea that seemed to be at the centre of the Turnbull government's decision on the French submarines, which was that Australia needed sovereignty when it came to shipbuilding. We are essentially giving up on that idea, and we are tying our fortunes now. One of the core weapon systems for our national defence, we are tying that to maintaining close relations with the United States and the UK, because we cannot operate these submarines by ourselves. So we're tying ourselves ever more closely to the US and the UK with all the risks that entails. This is going to be an incredibly demanding project. There was a reason why the nuclear-powered option was rejected in the past, and it deserves very close scrutiny. And in fact, it is troubling to me, in fact, that in making this announcement, there has been absolutely no public or parliamentary debate on this question. Parliament hasn't had any opportunity to scrutinise this.
To Victoria now, where vaccination will be mandatory for construction workers from next week. I'm joined now by Melissa Greenall from the Master Builders Association of Victoria. Melissa Greenall, thank you so much for your time. Is your group supportive of mandating vaccines?
Mandate vaccines, as we know it's a critical pathway to getting the 320,000 strong building and construction workers back on site, back to work and safe.
The rule comes into effect next Thursday. Is that enough time for workers to get vaccinated?
Yes, look, we had the announcement earlier this month around the 90% mandate to have 50% of workers back on site. So the industry has been actively mobilising in order to ensure that we could hit that 90% target. Now, look, no doubt there will be some tough as we try to get those vaccination appointments, but we really appreciate the government prioritising both Pfizer and AZ vaccines so that we can ensure we can get as many of our workers vaccinated before the 23rd.
The union, the construction union, is against the mandating of vaccines. Are workers enthusiastic about this mandate?
Look, there's no doubt there's vaccine hesitancy, but that's not a construction-specific issue. That is, we see that across the community. So what we do say to our employers who have workers who are vaccine hesitant is to encourage them to speak to their healthcare professionals so that they can seek out the best vaccine for them. We know that vaccines are so critical to our recovery through this pandemic across all of our communities. So we need everybody, regardless if they hold a hammer or a pen, to get vaccinated as quick as we can so we can all get back to work.
How will the vaccine mandate be policed?
Look, we're working through that with government around how this will be enforced. We do know that the vaccination certificates are linked to the MyGov website through Medicare, and the construction industry is well versed in recording things like registrations and licensing, etc. for their staff. So look, there is another layer here, but we have no doubts that our employers across the state will be ready to go on the 23rd and work through those issues.
We know that there are going to be travel restrictions too for workers because there have been outbreaks at multiple construction sites. Are you comfortable with the new restrictions, so tradies in Melbourne can't go out to the regions and vice versa?
Look, there is some concerns there that this is going to slow down and impact quite heavily on our work sites. As we know, our skilled workforce does live across both broader metro and regional areas. So we do need to work through those issues with government and how we can do that safely and ensure that we can keep these critical projects. Many of our regional communities have significant projects across their townships that are going to require these workers to be able to be on site. But we do appreciate that there is a safety issue here. We don't want to see COVID seeded into our regional communities, so we just need to work through the logistics of that. The building and construction industry has consistently proven that we can work safely, and the revision 14 of our COVID safe guidelines are testament to that. So we're confident that we can work through these issues and ensure that we can get our workers mobilised safely in line with the government's expectations and needs.
Yeah, and what else is being done? Because isn't it also things like workers won't be able to take their meal breaks indoors and things like that?
Look, there has been the announcement around tea rooms closing, and we are working through government. We've had meetings today. We'll continue those discussions tomorrow. We do know that the tea rooms do play a role, and especially on our large-scale construction sites, so that workers can take their breaks safely. So we just need to work through that. We will work through government as closely as we can and our members to ensure we can come up with solutions that keep our workers safe, both in OH&S point of view, but also with COVID. And we know that our industry is willing to step up and do what's necessary to make that happen.
Okay, Melissa Greenall, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
SpaceX has made history launching the first all-civilian crew into orbit. The Inspiration 4 mission is expected to last about 3 days from liftoff to splashdown in the Atlantic. Billionaire Jared Isaacman paid an undisclosed sum to secure a seat for himself and his 3 crewmates. Among them are a geoscience professor, a data engineer and a childhood cancer survivor who will act as chief medical officer on the flight. The flight is also serving as a fundraiser. Mr. Isaacman has already pledged $100 million to a research hospital and hopes to double that figure.
Incredible what the mission in mind is to help people, and not just, nobody's going up there to show off. It's actually for a purpose, a wise purpose, and that is to improve people's health, and the money raised also contributes to helping people's health be restored and the cure of cancer, etc. I'm a cancer survivor, and so it's an amazing thing to be able to explore and find new cures for illnesses.
The rocket's first stage booster was seen detaching from the spacecraft's top half later on. The booster then flew itself back to Earth and landed on a drone ship floating on the Atlantic named Just Read the Instructions. Astrophysicist at UNSW Lisa Harvey-Smith says it's a unique mission.
It's very much unlike the recent flights by Jeff Bezos and Richard Branson, which sort of went up and down in a few minutes, a bit of a joyride. This is a very serious type of spacecraft. SpaceX is a long way ahead in that respect. So they're actually orbiting the Earth. They're not going to the International Space Station, which is what a lot of these missions do, but they're actually orbiting for 3 days, so free flying, going to a very high altitude, over 570 kilometres above the Earth. So we humans haven't been that high for a very large number of years. So really exploring deeper space, orbiting the Earth, and they'll have a great view while they're up there.
If you've been thinking the flu has virtually disappeared from our lives, you're not wrong. Before COVID, the number of influenza cases was surging in the hundreds of thousands. This year, there were fewer than 500 cases nationally. Surprisingly, half of those were in Queensland. Health experts say the virus will make a comeback.